Welcome to Pelle Neroth Taylor Unplugged. Well, I've been away in Amsterdam for a couple of weeks, hence the lack of updates. I was down doing a sex story. I have stayed away from those things generally, but a couple of my interviewees in the last few weeks of TNT sharpened my focus because I realised it was an area in my journalistic career that I'd relatively neglected, and so have other serious commentators. And it's that old regular thing, sex. To what extent are intelligence agencies and powerful groupings or forces using sex to extort favours or compromises or quid pro quos from other powerful people? And to what extent is that sex being filmed and recorded and used for compromat? That is a Russian word for recording people's shenanigans and then threatening to expose it unless they cooperate in some way. Now, interestingly, when regarding Trump, talk of compromat was quite an open possibility. I mean, people said that when he was attending some Miss Universe competition in Moscow, he stayed in a room that Obama had stayed in one hotel in Moscow, and had sex or had a pee experience at golden showers with some Moscow prostitutes, which the Russians had then recorded secretly and used that to threaten to expose Trump in case he did not compromise on American national security when elected. Well, I mean, that was very much the single argument that the intelligence agencies used against Trump, saying that he was a security risk. But of course, if you can imagine one side doing it, you can imagine other sides doing it, and you can imagine it applying it to other politicians. That logic is strangely lacking in the Western mainstream media analyst thinking, maybe deliberately or not. As it happens, there's no proof ever adduced for Trump having slept in that hotel room and having had sex with golden showers and it being video recorded. You think Trump, at the age of 79, of being a public figure for 50 years, having owned numerous hotels, apparently being germophobic, would think twice about risking things, even if he was an outsider to politics. He was no outsider to the worlds of business and extortion, having worked in New York all his life. So he always said that he didn't have prostitutes pee on him, and that was never proven. And then that Russiagate story died away, of course, in about 2018 when the that FBI former director, exonerate him more or less. Although, and interestingly, you might have thought that the left-wing mainstream media would have used some other sex scandal, but no, it hasn't turned up in this election campaign at all. Anyway, so I was down in Amsterdam, and I had an interview with a woman called Jane. It was one of my last interviews on TNT, who had a sensational story about one of her candidates, one of her interviews called Liz, who'd experienced all sorts of strange things. And I thought that having some time over now, rather than just having stories fed to me and bigging up interpreting other people's stories, as one does in interviews when you have to do 4 interviews a day, there's no time for own research. I thought I'd do my own documentary at last. I've had a couple of documentaries under my belt. And so I went down there, and Liz was obliging, and she told me an astonishing story. I mean, the first thing was that she'd been abused from the age of 3 or 4. She'd been farmed out by her grandfather to local worthies in the town of Breda, where she was raped in a brewery. And then she was trafficked out to other people, and it culminated in her being... 2 incidents that struck me when I interviewed her in a hotel room in Amsterdam. Strangely enough, the journalistic interview process, where you hold up a camera and someone is vulnerable in front of you, sitting on a bed or on a sofa or a chair, is not that dissimilar from the rape or pornography video situation. But of course, I was not raping her. I was saving her, if you like. And she was saying that, the first big incident which really struck home was when she was going to the bathroom during one of the early teens rape orgies she had in the late 70s with senior aristocrats and officials in Holland. Which she'd seen some fellow teenage girl's stomach being slit open and other men pleasuring themselves at the sight of that. And the second thing was one of Holland's most famous war hero type, political public figures. Never stood for office, but he was very close to very top people in society, and he's a household name. In the Netherlands, even today, I won't go in further for fear of libel or whatever, but he is very well established. Also, there's an international name, although the Dutch are not that well known abroad, for starting up several international organizations, which we see as a negative force even today. Well, this guy apparently was a hunter, and he had dogs, and on his estate he asked young girls to run away from him naked down the lawn, and he'd take shots at them, and he shot at Liz's friend and killed that girl, but not Liz herself, and the dogs were set on after them. Now, there's no proof of either of those incidents having happened, but more of that later. She spoke with conviction, and she was a very nice person. She played the piano as a concert pianist in her 20s. And it was a series of flashbacks that led her to remember her childhood and early teens memories. She said she'd been deprogrammed or dislocated by the sex events. And then the other bombshell came when we were walking around Amsterdam one afternoon, and she asked to talk to me on camera about what she wanted to tell. It was that she'd been a trained assassin for powerful forces, a black ops. It was called a Black Widow program. And what had happened was that the intelligence agencies, having spent decades, I mean, it's well documented, there's a guy called Sidney Gottlieb, who was the CIA's chief poisoner, and a very respectable journalist called Stephen Kinzer wrote a very good book about this. CIA, which is essentially about controlling people and making them do what you want, whether they be politicians or adversaries or whatever. They'd always tried to brainwash people, always tried to control people. They never quite found something that worked, at least in the first iteration of their project, which was called MK Ultra. They used LSD, they used hypnosis and much else, and this MK Ultra program came out in 1975 during the church hearings, but all the documentation had been destroyed already in 1973 by the rather sinister boss of CIA, Helms. So what happened? What if that program has been restarted? Well, you can guess that it probably has. It's just got a different name, and it's just even better concealed because it must be catnip for the intelligence agencies. And 50 years after those LSD programs, can we not guess that they would have succeeded and found some technological, chemical, or biological way to control people? Well, anyway, I don't have the data on that, but Liz says that she was controlled using the fact that her personality had been fractured and fragmented by these early traumas, and they built up these compartmentalized compartments inside her brain that allowed her to carry out an assassin's work without her knowing about it or being aware. And so she could be a normal person in a normal everyday and then carry out these jobs when she was triggered by these various codes that she might see on television that had been planted there, or somebody sent her a letter or something, or somebody sent her some kind of signal combination of words. And she showed me the I Am Amsterdam location. I mean, there's a very famous set of letters, man high, that were in a very public place in Amsterdam. And I love Amsterdam is like I love New York. And I am coloured red. I am as in I am Amsterdam. And those words, I-A-M, were trigger words for her in their various iterations. And she was turned into a black ops assassin with a code name Mia. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but she insisted it was true. She said, it's not my truth, it's the truth. So what I see there is certainly could be true, but she didn't offer any explanation or details beyond a very sort of convincing mien. I mean, she didn't stand to gain anything from me except some minor publicity. I wasn't going to pay her for this. So, I mean, what attention, I guess, if she's an attention seeker, if she's a lunatic or something. But she seemed a very sane, very intelligent woman who mostly wanted to get back to playing the piano, and she mostly wanted her story out so that I wouldn't happen to other people. Well, apparently these things are going on still. So she was a black ops assassin. She told me perfunctorily about a couple of operations involving seducing people and then killing them with poison and a dagger in one occasion. Anyway, I researched around the subject, and in nearby neighbouring Belgium, there's a famous Dutroux scandal in 1997 where an unemployed guy with 5 houses, already that is an alarm bell, kidnapped a couple of girls, 2 starved to death while he was in jail on another thing. 2 were killed, they were apparently too old, 18 or 19, and suffocated alive in plastic bags before they were buried in the garden of one of Dutroux's properties. And 2 girls survived, because one of the girls, they were kidnapped several times. The kidnapping method was using a white van and then stopping and clutching a schoolgirl, dragging her into the van and chloroforming her, and then locking her into a dungeon behind sort of a secret doorway to an otherwise normal household. And the second girl's was fortunately spotted by a passerby who took down the registration number of the van, and that tracked her down and released both girls. Well, it was a cause célèbre and a scandal. The two girls were emaciated but alive, and then it came to trial, and one of the girls was very beautiful by then, age 20, wrote a book about it. I was 12 years old and cycled out one morning or something, you know. Anyway, the Dutroux scandal was probably the most famous story to come out of Belgium for the last 30 or 40 years, a small country. And Dutroux always said that he was just a procurer. I mean, he was kidnapping these girls on behalf of a much wider network. Well, that was tamped down on. I mean, he was quietened down. He went sentenced to life in prison. A couple of early cop teams said yes, and they found a couple of witnesses coming forward after the Dutroux scandal became public, and the police named them from X1 to X10, I think it was. X1 was the most verbal and interesting and detailed. Her name turned out to be Regina Louf, and she had very, very detailed accounts of being witness to murders. Murders are the kind of incidents that Liz, in another country, Holland, described to me without evidence. But this woman, Liz, pointed out that the murder took place in a mushroom farm, and she gave a very, very precise description of this dungeon, which is, I mean, a subterranean mushroom farm, part of a much larger structure. Every doorway in this voluminous, cavernous building, which the owner said, yes, well, I mean, obviously she's been to this place. She must have known it. And she gave quite good descriptions of the physical state of this murdered person, called Christine van Hees, who's 15, that only somebody who'd been there could have known. So either she was fed the information by the police, but they seemed like honest cops, or she'd actually been there. And a second incident involving Karine Dellert, another girl who was murdered, she identified the girl, whom she called Chloe, by a photograph, and she said, "Oh, I don't know anything about the girl, but I know which street she lived at, which school she was at." So the police went to that school, took the old school photo albums and produced the one from 1981 and 82. She identified the girl, and that girl had actually been murdered and disappeared for 3 years until she discovered, I think, in a sanitation tank in 1985. So that was in that time frame she'd been killed. And this girl, Chloe, had been killed while apparently giving birth, or immediately after giving birth. And she described things about the birth process that no outsider could have known. And for instance, I think in the autopsy report, they describe it as having an ankle chain around her ankle. And Regine had also an ankle chain, described an ankle chain. And she had a laminaria, whatever that is. It's a kind of stick which facilitates pregnancy or birth in her private parts. And again, that gives support to the idea that Regina was actually there and that these things actually take place. I mean, the young girls, both of them were indisputably murdered, and the sort of shocking thing was that they were murdered as part of a sex act. But if you can imagine them just being murdered, why wouldn't they be murdered as part of a sex act? And so Regina was a survivor of these various things that are going on, and she told the details to the very respectable BBC journalist called Olenka Frenkie, who made a documentary about it in 2003. And Olenka is a very credible journalist, also listed a several number of people who'd been killed or died mysteriously just as they were about to witness about the wider ramifications of the Dutroux network, of which he was just a small cog, and which reached up into the heights of Belgian society. I also talked to a woman called Anneke Lucas on my TNT show. She'd moved to New York, a very attractive, credible woman, written a book published by a respectable publisher saying that she'd also been groomed from an early age and had sex, and she was trafficked and travelled around, part of a large network. She went to aristocrats' castles, and she also saw killings. She incredibly, she even witnessed a cannibalism process. A boy who's disobedient, because they also trafficked young boys, was killed, and then they had to eat it, and she says she still can't eat meat. I said, is that really true? It sounds incredible. It sounds like something from Marquis de Sade. And she said, well, I wrote it and it comes back to me in a flashback. I leave aside the possibility that a lot of these trafficking incidents were true, and then that their imagination makes them think that these things are slightly more incredible happen than actually did happen. But so maybe they were killed, but maybe they were not cannibalized. But anyway, she vouches for that. All by way of saying that when I went down to see Elizabeth Wallace, although she didn't provide any physical evidence or confirmatory evidence from third parties that her horrible experiences of seeing a girl with her private parts slit up and her stomach slit up and being hunted by this very famous Dutch leader of society holding a rifle up and asking them to run, killing one of them. There's no evidence for that, and there's no evidence for assassin projects. Some of her experiences are very similar to the more proven experiences of those two Belgians, Anneke Lucas and Regina Loof, that I spoke to. And at least Regina's story has been corroborated by the BBC, as well as the Belgian detectives who really believed her, and they were the crack detectives in Belgium. As well as in my case, I talked to Anneke Lucas, who also seemed a very plausible person. So in my documentary, I took these three women's stories together, and although they say that extensive claims require extensive evidence, I leave it for the viewer to watch and judge. And the larger story is, of course, the Epstein scandal, the Pizzagate scandal. The Epstein scandal, I mean, girls 10 to 12, 14, 15, 16, 17 had sex or gave massage to lots of kingpins and powerful people. Clinton's been mentioned, Bill Gates and so on. And they were on this so-called Lolita Express that went down to Epstein's Caribbean island, and Epstein apparently videoed these things, perhaps for an intelligence agency, perhaps for Mossad, perhaps for the CIA. When Epstein was later arrested, a guy, an investigative journalist who's also appeared on my show, his name is Nick Bryant, told me that the Attorney General, or the prosecutor who was asked to prosecute these guys, was told, leave off Epstein somewhat, he's intelligence. So probably American intelligence, and or the Mossad might have had a role there. So that guy's name was Acosta, and you can read Nick Bryant. He's written fantastic books about. He's a really, really credentialed journalist. So again, that gives support to the wider thesis. But the point is that even Nick Bryant only says that the girls went down to about 9, and he doesn't detail this kind of sadism, incredible stories about killing people and hunting them that my European interviewees said. So the wider story is I want to make a contribution to the American election campaign because Elon Musk was talking to Tucker Carlson the other day on his Tucker Carlson's show and saying, the reason why so many oligarchs, people like Bill Gates, support Kamala Harris is they're terrified if Trump wins the election, because Trump is going to expose them and their dark deeds on the Lolita Express. Because what happened was such prosecution that took place after prosecutors had been warned off by warnings of being Epstein being intelligence, was that only Ghislaine Maxwell, who was his co-procurer, actually is serving time, and not a single name. One of the victims under 10 has been named. A couple of teenage girls have been named, but it's not actually illegal to have sex with a 17-year-old girl. And only Prince Andrew and a couple of the others have been named, but nothing has happened to them, and have been, let alone the Bill Gates and all the other oligarchs. So it all leads back to the point is, were these really powerful people who've been involved but haven't been suffered? The Epstein client list hasn't been fully made public, and the victims have been made fully public either. Were the sort of most famous result of the Epstein scandal was a photograph showing Prince Andrew with his arm around a girl of 17. Okay, and we think, I call that a limited hangout. That means that it's to show the public that, yeah, it's bad, but it's not that bad. Is the Epstein scandal involving lots of top people, not just Prince Andrew, but Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, a lot of Hillary Clinton, involve much younger people than we think, and much more abusive practices than we think, along the lines of the ones I explored in my interviews in Holland and Belgium in the last couple of weeks. If that's the case, it could explain the reason why our elites are so totally, they're corrupt and evil beyond belief, and that's something that we've got to deal with, we as the people, if we vote our man in, Trump. And secondly, it can explain a lot of reasons why politicians act the way they do. They're not loyal to the public, they're loyal to the person who has a hold on them in terms of a video footage of their terrible dark deeds. That's what I was trying to show in my documentary, and I'll upload it quite shortly, and it's only a draft, but you can determine for yourselves the importance of this topic.